So, welcome to Science in the Virtual Pub. And tonight's session is How has your science changed in the last 5 years? With Toby Ault. Oh, and Glenn Branch was going to join us, but he was unable to. Katie Fiorella, Dave Margolius, and Lisa White. And so the driving question for tonight is how has your science changed in the last 5 years? We'll start off in order of their first appearance, which I think puts Lisa first. But a suggestion for you all is we'll be switching speakers as we go. So I suggest you in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom window, click the multi-speaker view, and that'll switch depending on who's speaking. So you'll be able to sort of see the speaker as the featured person in your video window. And I think in older versions of Zoom, you might just click speaker and it'll highlight the individual speaker. And so the panelists are Lisa White, Assistant Director for Education and Outreach at the University of California Museum of Paleontology, Dave Margolius, the Director of Public Health for the City of Cleveland, Dr. David Margolius, I should say, Toby Ault, Associate Professor of Earth and Atmospheric Science at Cornell, and Katie Fiorella, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Public Health and Ecosystem Health at Cornell. And I'm Don Haas, the Director of Teacher Programming at PRI. And I'm going to give you the plan for the session here. I'll say a few words about the history of the virtual pub, and then we'll do what it says there. Folks will introduce themselves and the work that they do, and then we'll answer some questions, and then we'll open it up for general discussion. And my kitty Velma is saying hello. So a few words about the history of science in the virtual pub. In the fall of 2019, I was an adjunct teaching at the seminar in informal science education at the University of Buffalo. And Ken Zidell was a student in that class, a grad student who, for a class project, created Buffalo Science in the Pub, which began as a monthly program in January of 2020. And we had very successful sessions in both January and February of 2020. And then along came March of 2020, and the world went home. And Buffalo Science in the Pub became Science in the Virtual Pub and went to every 2 weeks for the first couple of years of that program. And then we started taking summer breaks, and now we meet on the second and fourth Thursday of the month from the end of September through the beginning of May. And as I said earlier, tonight should be our 100th session, but we had to postpone one session due to illness. So it's actually our 99th. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it to Lisa, who, for her previous appearances in 2020, talked about demonstrating the need for equity and inclusion in the geosciences through increasing access to authentic paleontological data in classic field sites. And she was part of our panel in March of 2021 of Women in Paleontology. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Lisa. And here's her first slide. And I'll let you tell me when to advance.
All right. Thank you, Don. Thanks for inviting me, and pleasure to be here with the other panelists. And with this first slide, the photos and images are a way to capture a bit about me and my background. So I've been at the UC Berkeley Museum of Paleontology for just over 13 years. And honestly, a most often question that comes to me is, how do you become an education director at a museum? There's not a clear pathway, and I came to it from a more traditional pathway, which is as a faculty member. So I was a professor at San Francisco State University in the Geosciences Department for more than 20 years before Berkeley tapped me for my current role in 2012. And all my allegiances are there, by the way. So the top of the slides, I'm at the UCMP, at UC Berkeley, but I'm part banana slug. So my graduate degree is from UC Santa Cruz, and my undergraduate degree is from San Francisco State, where I was fortunate to return as a faculty member after I received my doctorate. And although my primary role is as an education director at a museum, and I'll share more about what that is, I try to stay close to my science as a micropaleontologist studying fossil diatoms. So I still get out in the field. I've gotten out to sea over the years on the Joyde's Resolution and other ships. And as I came to really embrace this role of extending science to broader communities, it was a real pleasure to be able to go out on that vessel, as well as others with groups of students and educators to really try to share with them the importance of seagoing science. So whether I'm here at the museum on the Berkeley campus or out and about connecting with other paleontologists or other educators, I've really tried to make my discipline more inclusive. If we go to the next slide, Don, the various icons that are shown here capture many of the programs that I've led or co-led. John Haas and Rob Ross and I were fortunate to combine forces with UCMP, PRI, and other museums to bring virtual field experiences as part of the EPIC project. But these images really capture what it was like 5 years ago when many of the programs that I led were going full force, quite a bit of funding. Honestly, I have the chronic inability to say no. So I just get involved in a lot of things, but I'm very passionate about extending science to all kinds of groups. And whether it's managing the team here, the science communication team that leads our very popular web resources and understanding evolution, understanding science, understanding global change. We continue to reach audiences around the world with very reliable, vetted, trustworthy resources on difficult topics. Because of all the years I was a faculty member at San Francisco State University, working with undergraduates, working with faculty, working in field and ship settings with other professionals has been a really wonderful way to highlight the importance of field training and the connections to what we do and see and collect in the field to curatorial topics, managing collections, and all of that is also connected. So I always try to thread my discipline area as a micropaleontologist, training in field geology and ocean science to a variety of programs that extend all sorts of resources here at the museum. So if we go to the next slide, so there was a lot of support for the whole range of programs that could serve broader audiences. And in some of the roles that I serve with the professional societies, I chair the Diversity Inclusion Committee for the American Geophysical Union, and I was participating as an editor for the EOS magazine for AGU. And there was 5 years ago to this month a double issue that nicely highlighted some of the very innovative programs that a real range of Earth and space scientists were doing to implement practices, meet the needs of other communities. You all remember during that year of 2020, managing the pandemic, dealing with racial reckoning, really taking a close look at what we do and don't do as scientists, as academics, as educators, as professionals. How can we be collaborating more effectively to serve various audiences and reimagine the geoscience? So needless to say, I was really busy trying to answer the call to a lot of these opportunities and really excited to share ways that we can better communicate our science to audiences of all types. So after everything that's happened in the last 5 years, uh, Don, if you'll go to the next slide, I feel like this really captures where we are. And even though this isn't my primary role day to day as an ocean-going scientist who sailed on this vessel multiple times, and in more recent years was on the vessel that cores for deep ocean sediments. And so people with my specialty are very interested in dating the core, looking at climate signals, and to be able to share that exciting approach to science with educators and students was a great way for someone like me to merge my education role at a museum and the science that I love. And the demobilization or the retirement, the decommissioning, whatever you want to call it, this very important ship to ocean and climate science is no longer at sea. And it was reaching the end of its useful life. It was had I don't know how many, thousands of miles of ship time and sites, but it was a plan by the NSF to not fund the ship anymore. And for many, especially scientists that are more early career than I am, it was even more frustrating and unfortunate as they were just starting their careers and the importance of this time on ship. So I feel like, it captures this sort of strong wake-up call. Even before the current administration came to Washington, the plan had been for some years for the NSF to not invest in this anymore. And so it's hard to remain hopeful. What are we going to do? How are we going to pivot? How are we going to have an international ocean discovery program without a US-led ship? How do we pivot and mobilize? And what do you do? Needless to say, for those of us that were working on diversity programs, so separate from the demobilization of a ship, having so many programs and the funding for broader impact programs just ripped out from under our feet was shocking. So what do we do? How do we pivot? How do I remain hopeful? So the last slide I will show also draws from some of the AGU publications, the EOS magazine from 2021, where many of us were still very much, in the thick of designing and sharing and trying to be innovative on broadening impact programs. But what I've really come to value, even more so now, about a figure like this, where the authors made the analogy using a braided stream. When we think about ways to encourage, advise, mentor individuals really at all stages of their career to stay the course, to stay with it, to find your pathway. And we know times get tough. There may not be the kind of funding that we anticipated. The priorities have clearly shifted in our country for what's fundable, at least from the federal arm of things. Uh, but no matter what, we are going to draw people to our disciplines. They're going to want to stay. They might have to be a little more creative. Maybe it takes longer in college. Perhaps there's some other challenges that they'll face as they try to become part of the workforce that we want to continue to prioritize as inclusive. So I'm sure I used up more than my time, but thank you.
Yes, and
All right, sorry. All right,
that's
okay.
okay. That's
All right.
okay. I'll note that Dave was the first person to get in his slides. I asked everybody for 5 slides in 5 minutes, and Dave asked politely if his 8 slides were okay, and I said okay as long as you keep it to 5 minutes, and then I set that precedent for everyone, and hopefully we'll stick a, we'll be able to fit it all in. But I'm going to hand it off to Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
Great slide.
Yeah, and so Dave's previous visits are there, and we'll let him take it away.
All right, great. So I'm just going to speak through the journey of us working on lead poisoning at the city of Cleveland, and hopefully through that journey answer those questions that Uncle Don asked us. Uh,
Yes.
so uh, in 2024 in Cleveland, we noted that the rate of lead poisoning had not declined in the last 5 years. In 2019, a law was passed that basically mandated inspections for every rental unit in the city of Cleveland, modeling after for Rochester, because in Cleveland, our lead poisoning is coming from paint, and we found out that it wasn't working. Next slide. Cleveland's lead poisoning rate is more than double that of our pure cities. If you look at this, is just looking at blood lead levels that are greater than 5 micrograms per deciliter. Cleveland in 2023, so almost 12%. And you can see the other cities on the screen. Buffalo's housing stock might be older than Cleveland's, but
Yeah, I think it
unfortunately
is.
they track data as a county and not as a city, so I wasn't able to pull that data. Flint, Michigan is often thought of as the kind of, where when people think about lead poisoning, their lead poisoning rate in 2015, when they made the news, which was from water, from city manager choosing this more corrosive water supply, it was 5% rate. And so you can see, compare that to where Cleveland is back in 2023. Next. And so, what we basically found out, the city, was that increasing the number of these rental inspections alone wasn't doing the trick, and found out basically that inspectors could cheat the system. They could go into a property, take a wet wipe, clean out all the places where the lead tests were going to be done, and then the inspectors, would test, and it would be zero. And the house would pass inspection, and the lead poisoning rate didn't come down. Next. And so, we really said to the community, this was last year, that it's not just about increasing the number of inspections that are being done. It's actually, those inspections have to lead to homes getting improved, windows getting replaced, chip paint getting fixed, doors and porches getting replaced, and all those things together would reduce lead poisoning. But that's not all. Next slide. We also needed and need more homes being built, and more old homes that can't be saved, that were just covered in lead paint. We need them to be taken offline through demolition. And that needs to happen. Plus, that bottom right-hand corner, we need to make sure that if kids live in Cleveland, they live in those same homes that are new or fixed or upgraded, and not in the homes that haven't been touched by this process at all. Next slide. And the good news is we're doing all that stuff right now. So we're building homes, we're tearing down or fixing old homes, we're training workers to do this work, we're ticketing and prosecuting property owners who don't comply, we're spreading the word, we're doing all these good things. And it's working. Next slide. So all these metrics that I just showed, they're all going up right now. And next slide. And as a result, our lead poisoning rate is down to 14.9%, down from 18% a couple years ago, and 16 last year. And it keeps going down every time I check. And so I say all of that in terms of where we are with government distrust and science, in that for 5 years, we were doing something, the government was doing something that wasn't working. And this is just a kind of a microcosm of where we've lost trust with a lot of our residents in Cleveland, and I think throughout the country, where government's trying to do the right thing, but it just hasn't been effective. And so we really had to look in the mirror and figure out, what we could do to make things better. And through that, we've been able to reduce the lead poisoning rate, and with time, we hope in public health, and through the city of Cleveland, it's going to earn back that trust that we've lost, and hope that increases the voter turnout, and gets the right people in the White House. So 5 minutes, I'm turning it over.
All right, thank you. And off to Toby, who kept us the average number of slides okay by not having any. Go ahead, Toby.
Great. Well, one of the reasons why I don't have any slides is because the image that's in my head is very copywritten image. It is the opening scene in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. If you remember it, when Captain Jack Sparrow is stepping off the mast of his sinking ship onto the dock to safety. And that's what comes to mind when I think about my funding right now. I'm using the very last of it to try to get to a different place because we, as you know, as Don and Rob both know, for the last several years since I got back from my sabbatical in Sweden in 2022, we have been working towards a relatively large, by my standards, a relatively large NSF grant that would promote STEM identity activation and at the same time help us in the climate and drought science world develop new types of low cost instruments for learning about land atmosphere coupling in the Northeast and drought risks in a changing climate in the Northeast. And we had envisioned this project needing a lot of preliminary data and deployments, and so we'd set up soil moisture sensors, we'd hired students, we were getting everything into position, we were getting the feedback on the proposal year after year, making sure that it aligned with what the program managers wanted, and moving everything in the right direction. And we received word this summer, early this fall, that not only was it not going to be funded, the program itself wasn't going to exist in the same way anymore. And so it's a disruption for our strategy, but I think the reason why this Pirates of the Caribbean metaphor comes to mind is because I have a handful of residual grants from philanthropy that I'm still leveraging to be out west where I am now and to talk with potential industry partners and collaborators and potential alumni who have experience with developing these low-cost sensor networks in the western part of the U.S., especially in California, where wildfires and droughts have been a major issue and where they have deployed wind or anemometers, wind sensors, and vegetation moisture sensors at relatively high spatial resolution for a number of years now. And I think we can learn a lot from them and collaborate a lot with them. And I also agree with David that we're doing a lot of introspection and looking in the mirror and saying, what is it that we weren't doing enough of? And so the other part, which we can come back to, actually this question just really on the nose. It's like anticipating what I was about to say. So one of the other things that we have been working with a local company, air quality egg and Zinect sensors. They have custom-made 4 prototypes for my research group that have GPS and ultra-high resolution sampling of PM 2.5, well, the whole distribution of fine particulate matter. And the idea being that these are sensors that are Wi-Fi enabled. They can be taken anywhere, plugged into just like a USB battery, and I've got one right here to show you, right here. And I strapped this to the roof of my car in San Diego and drove all the way to Portland with it, and I have a data set to prove it.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
It worked. It was amazing. And that's science in a nutshell. That was like, why did I think I could do that? Because I see myself as a scientist. Because at some point in my life, I went through STEM identity activation, and I went through the pits of despair when you're a graduate student. You don't think anything's ever going to work, but you see yourself as a scientist, and you can get through it. And that's what we want, I think, with this project, is to bring everyone who sees themselves as maybe being a scientist to cross that threshold at whatever stage is appropriate for them. And we're just not giving up, but it's a little harder now.
All right. Is that you done?
I'm done.
Okay. Thank you. That was great. And next up is Katie Fiorella, and I'll just note that one of the reasons I asked Katie is that when I was flying back from the Geological Society of America meeting in September or October, and flying in for my connection in Baltimore and looking out and seeing all the algal blooms from above, which I don't remember noticing before, and just being really struck by what I assume is an increase in that. And so, since Katie talked about that before, and shortly after I got back, my colleague Ingrid, who is on the call tonight, when we were talking about who to have on our panel, she suggested Katie, and I was like, yes. So go ahead, Katie.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it. I pulled up this graph that was in my presentation last time and is looking at how the aquatic food consumption is growing. So you'll probably notice that most of these lines are going upwards. Our consumption of all sorts of foods is going up, or all sorts of animal foods at least. And this trend has only continued and is even sharper for aquatic foods today. So my background's in public health and environmental science, and so I think a lot about aquatic food systems and how changes in them affect the nutrition that people can get from them and the jobs that they have in them. And fish are really highly nutritious. They're also really a particularly sustainable animal source of food. And that's important because these types of food tend to have a really high density of nutrients, including protein, but also including micronutrients. And they tend to also deliver them in ways that our bodies are really good at absorbing. So especially for people who are facing various forms of malnutrition, of which many in the world are still, either micronutrient malnutrition or like a full malnutrition and lack of calories as well, animal foods can really make the difference in their nutrition. And even more than that, 1 in 12 people globally work in small-scale fisheries. So that's a really huge proportion of the world. We sometimes hear numbers about there being really a large number of farmers in the world, people that are still working in small-scale agriculture. And only quite recently do we have some really good numbers about fishers too. So that's obviously less true in the United States. We don't have the same density. We have a lot more commercial production. If you can flip to the next slide. But fish globally are traded incredibly widely. So this is a map of the global trade in aquatic foods. In the United States, 80% of our aquatic foods are actually imported. So we both produce a really small number of fish, and we have a really small aquaculture industry relative to the rest of the world. And so for our food system and our access to these aquatic foods, what's going on in the rest of the world really quite matters. And hop to the next slide. So my group thinks a lot about the connections between the freshwater ecosystems, the people that are working in these systems, and what that means for their access both to money and to food. And we do this all over the world. So this particular project that I'm going to highlight a couple of different projects. And this one is from Cambodia, where the biodiversity of fish that people eat is really high. And we were trying to understand how the intactness of those ecosystems and the extent of biodiversity available affects the proportion of species that people are catching, consuming, and selling. And so what we find is that when there are more fish in the ecosystem, people catch more biodiversity, they catch more species of fish, and they also consume far more species of fish. And this matters a lot because fish actually have, I said they're really nutritious before, but they're nutritious in different ways. So whereas a lot of foods that we eat are relatively consistent across different varieties, fish actually range quite considerably. So some are really high in vitamin A, others have more substantial quantities of iron. And so having a mix of them in your diet really makes a big difference nutritionally. So when people consume more biodiversity, they're also getting more nutrients. And then flip to the next slide. And yet a lot of these systems are under a bunch of different kinds of threats. So more and more, we are taking fish from the wild system, turning them into fish meal and feeding them to aquaculture species. This is improving all the time, and the amount of fish that we need to produce more fish is continually going down. We have more and more innovative ways of having feed. But as we produce more and more fish from aquaculture, we'll still need more and more wild fish for this fish meal. So that's a huge change happening. And about 50%, even more, of our fish today around the world come from aquaculture. So aquaculture isn't one thing. It varies really considerably. It's not necessarily better or worse than wild fishing. It's all pretty complicated. But for the future of our fish production and consumption, we are going to continue to have a lot of aquaculture, and a lot of it is actually sited in wild fisheries. So they interact really closely. So what you can see here in this picture is a cage that's sited in Lake Victoria, which is in East Africa, and it's used to produce farmed fish right in the middle of a global wild fishery that produces a huge proportion of the world's fish catch. So 1% of the global fish catch, 5% of the freshwater fish catch comes from this lake. And we now have all of these aquaculture cages inside of it. And so increasingly, the farmers are seeing these really massive fish kills happening in these cages, and have some ideas about what might be happening in terms of water quality changes, and also the potential of disease and pathogens coming in to fish that are some more vulnerable after poor water quality. And my research group has been helping to investigate this. So I'll flip to the next slide. So in particular, a graduate student, Eric Teplitz, has done a lot of work with farmers to understand these kills, disease sampling. This graph actually shows that they happen incredibly frequently. There's one big spike where a lot of fish kills happened, but we're seeing that actually these are really common, and they're both a threat to the livelihood of the aquaculturalists and to the wild ecosystem. And part of the reason I underline this work is also because it was initially funded by a USAID Fish Innovation Lab project that was cut almost a year ago now. And we had also been awarded a subsequent follow-up project to keep exploring these dynamics that was also cut as well. And those while some projects in various domains have come back, those ones are definitely gone forever. So wanted to just sort of underline the threads of some of the impacts that have happened lately. We'll flip to the next slide. And so to Don's earlier point, so one of the big things that's happening in Lake Victoria and elsewhere is this global expansion of harmful algal blooms. And that's one of the things we think is certainly happening at these cage sites, that the proliferation of algae is affecting the water quality, and potentially also the fish directly when there are toxins in the blooms. So flip to the next slide. And so another thing that we've been doing an awful lot of is testing the fish to try to understand whether the toxins also accumulate in fish. And we are seeing a lot of fish that increasingly do have some toxins in them. So this is very preliminary. We're very much still trying to understand the implications of that and how risky it might be for people that are consuming that fish as well. We'll flip to the next slide. And so I think just to summarize some of these changes in the last 5 years, we've lost some grant funding, we've made some shifts. I think we're increasingly living in a world where there's increasing kinds of pollution, and they're coming from different forms of changes. And we're thinking a lot in my group about the risk-benefit trade-offs in some of these big changes that are happening, down to sort of what are the trade-offs that are happening for individual species that we all might be looking to eat. And then the other thing I just wanted to underline that I think is a really big challenge of the moment is, and I pointed out a graduate student in my group who has just graduated. I think it's a really challenging time for scientists that are graduating with a PhD, thinking about what their job will be. Some of the things that they imagined they might do have really changed quite quickly. So I think they don't necessarily have a roadmap for what that looks like. And at the same time, the uncertainty in funding makes it really challenging to bring new graduate students in. And so I think to what Toby was saying about the importance of a scientific identity and getting a foothold in these things, training is really critical for that. And if there isn't certainty in funding and on a time horizon that provides students opportunities, the consequence really acutely right now is that is that we're accepting a lot less graduate students into our programs. And I think that's a huge loss going forward. So that is my conclusion.
Thank you. And I will note that I have been on 96 of the previous 98 sessions. Had a couple of co-hosts in there, and I did lead a couple of those. And my few quick slides here are mostly about how my science, which is mostly the science of teaching climate change and energy, and teaching and learning climate change and energy, and how that has changed in just the last 11 months. So here, this is globalchange.gov, what it looks like, or NCA, the National Climate Assessment on global change, .gov, what it looks like today. And here is when you go to climate.gov, you get redirected here. Whoops, what happened there? Oh, there's a link to the image. So let me get back to slideshow mode here. There we go. So when you go to climate.gov, you now get forwarded to this site, which, oh, stop it. Which has changed dramatically in the course of the last 12 months, mostly early in that time, to go into compliance with restoring gold standard science, which I don't think actually does gold standard science. And there we go. And but the good news is that folks are picking up the slack there, and climate.us now has the National Climate Assessment there. And you can see that some description of what climate.us has done to protect the data and resources there. The full National Climate Change Assessment has been replicated off of federal websites, and that's kind of good. I mean, it's good that it's still out there. It's bad that that's necessary. And likewise for this, you can see is climatelyeracy.earth rather than being part of climate.gov. And you can see that the original content here was from the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which was under that climate.gov site. Let's see, and my bad for linking my slide images. And one of my very favorite resources is the Energy Atlas on the Energy Information Administration website, which now looks like this when you go there. Though I have exchanged emails with the people behind the site, and they tell me that it is being upgraded and will be back online at some point, but it is very unclear as to when that'll come. But it's not all bad news. There is climate change education is changing in New York State and in other states around the country. Other states were actually ahead of us, and maybe we're picking up on that. Announced last month decided last month at the New York State Board of Regents, which is our state board of education. They approved provisional changes to climate change education, that climate change will be taught across the grade span. And it's implied, though it would be better if it was more directly stated, that it'll be taught across the disciplines. And that is open for comment until January 16th, I think. And more detailed descriptions of the expectations are expected in March, and I'm working with a group called the Climate and Resilience Education Task Force, along with folks at the New York State Education Department, on what that'll look like to some degree. And that is to some degree we're influencing it. I'm not sure how much influence we have, but we have had some, I do believe. So that's good news. In more recent good news, following on some long couple years worth of bad news on funding for my employer, We've raised $3.6 million this year to help us survive, and it is still a little bit of an open question as to whether or not we're going to survive, but it seems much more promising in December of 2025 than it looked in October or November. So that's great news. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my piece and open it up for the panel discussion, where we've already talked some about how our science has changed in the last 5 years. And I am just going to throw it open to the panel on what you expect to see in the next 5 years. And some of you hinted at that. And does anyone want to go first, or should I pick on someone? Toby, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Just building off of exactly what you just said. I drove from San Jose or San Mateo to Portland from 9:30 last night to 9:30 this morning. And in my head the whole time with this sensor on the roof, I was like, the Museum of the Earth must not fail. Like, this must not, it must not close its doors. It must remain a beacon for science education and resources for teachers, because we cannot do this without you guys. Like, we have invested so much in our capacity to be able to make the kinds of measurements that we desperately need in a changing climate, especially in light of what's happening with National Weather Service and NOAA.
Mm-hmm.
To have these community-based sensor networks out there is essential to cope with the threats of a changing climate, as well as to learn about the emergent dynamics of a changing climate. And we have spent not just, time building the equipment and investing in testing the equipment like I was doing, but also, as you know, trying to foster those relationships with teachers. But you guys have them built in and in spades, and we will not be able to do this if those doors close. And so every mile I was like, the museum must not fail. This museum shall not fail. That was my mantra. And if you're listening to this and you have any resources to help it not fail, please. Because it is, on a long, you look at like the payoff, the return on investment that we have seen from investing in science as a country over the last 80 years. And it's enormous. And so the scale of the donations, and for people who have already contributed, and I didn't buy coffee multiple times along the way, and I put those $5 towards you guys. I was like, if everyone does that, we'll make up that gap. And if you fast forward the value of that investment to New York State, to teachers, to the taxpayers, to communities, and being more resilient in the face of a changing climate, you could try to quantify. It would be in the billions on a 50-year time horizon, or you can invoke the value system with a capital V of the learning and the resilience and the approach towards a more sustainable and better way of making energy. And all of that is like done. I mean, that's what you do. And so we got to keep this thing going. Got to keep the candle burning here.
I'm verklempt. And I will note, one of the most heartening gifts that we got last week was a $100,000 gift from a retired teacher who I've known for many years. I had no idea she had the capacity to give a gift like that. It's like, oh my God. So Lisa's got her hand up. Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. Well, Dawn, in the time since I've seen you, at October at the Geological Society of America meeting, it is heartwarming to see the way in which the community has come together to support PRI. And there are other museums that are doing well or fine. We have a new source of donations to some of our evolution education programs, which is something to celebrate. But I can't help but think about the challenges that Katie raised, especially for faculty that are supervising graduate students and wanting to recruit prospective graduate students. And it's a tough road still for that. So I'm not sure where our optimism is coming from that. So maybe this is a question to Katie about what you're seeing in your network and where there might be a corner turned at some point. What do you say to perspectives, I guess, graduate students or even postdocs about staying the course, or if they should?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, my experience so far has been that there are still a lot of people really interested in the challenges that we're facing. I think in a lot of ways that resources like the Museum of the Earth and teachers that are taking their students places like that popped up in the chat, the museum that you're at are incredible resources, and they have really inspired a generation of students who want to do this work. I think one of the hardest things is seeing students that are really interested and not being able to take more of them. And so I haven't as much seen students not wanting to be involved in research as us just not having as many opportunities for them, because of uncertainty. There are some bright spots in that. I think that different programs are thinking more about graduate training and raising funding to support that kind of thing. But I think in the short term, there is a lot of pivoting to hiring other more short-term staff because of just sort of a financial uncertainty within a lot of research programs, and postdocs, but there won't be postdocs if there aren't graduate students first. So I do think, in universities that have been hard hit by a lot of the recent changes in the federal spending, I think they've really curtailed their graduate programs in a lot of ways. And so I think there is some potential that we're going to have, to some degree, a lost generation of graduate trainees. And I think we have people that are interested in like those opportunities. So far, that's not the challenge I've seen, but that we're not able to meet them with the same number of opportunities that we were just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, I know several people who were NOAA employees and others who were NOAA funded, who are most of those folks that I know are now either out of work or in a different job, and some of whom are leaving the country. And I think that's a a victory for them and a tragedy for us. And I worry an awful lot about that. And I also know faculty, college and university faculty all over the country who are seeing their students looking overseas for what they might do after they complete their programs, if they complete their programs. And so
Yeah.
other
I'll just say one more thing about that, Don. I think that is really true. I think the American university system is really a standard of the world, and that's something I think we should really be trying to maintain. It's been a tremendous service to science and innovation in this country and beyond, and I hope that it will continue to be. And I think some of it is really, there's even a very recent change to the loan availability for master's students and other professional degree students, that a lot of this stuff seems really mundane, but it'll make a really big impact on who's able to access training, and the number of students that we're able to support, if people can't access loans, for example.
Yeah, and I see Ingrid has put a question in the chat for Dave. Did you see that, Dave?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that they're freaking out right now in medical schools, um, with the federal grants all getting frozen in January last year. There were a lot of cuts and uncertainty, the same thing that you're all describing. I think now things have settled out a little bit more for them. I think that there were some medical schools in places like Alabama that were very effective in getting their senators to come around, and so it's still an issue. Everybody's still walking on broken glass, but I think a little bit more stable than it was.
Yeah, and of course, it's also worth noting the threats and cuts to diversity programs that I think diminish us all, whether we acknowledge that or not. Um, so, thoughts on what can session attendees do to help support your science? Anybody want to take that one? I will say vote for one thing.
Yeah. So you're related to that. I work in local government now, and so I really encourage people to get to know their local government and their council people and their mayor and all those things because that's where government starts. I think a lot of the consequences that we're experiencing now at the federal level are because people on both sides of the aisle don't trust government.
Yeah.
So I've just gone to this extreme. And so, I'm a progressive person. I get into office working for the city of Cleveland, and like the progressives are the meanest people to government employees than the few conservative folks who are in Cleveland. And so I think getting to know government, being involved will help us regain that trust and bring some, hopefully more common sense to the decision makers in DC in the future.
Yeah, and relatedly, I think the most damaging joke, or one of the most damaging jokes ever told, was Reagan saying, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And I think the damage that followed from that is just tremendous. And do you say that to the fireman when he comes to put out the fire when your house is on fire? Of course not. And you shouldn't say it to the scientist who's employed by the EPA or whatever either. And government has proven at various points in history to be very helpful, and at other points in history to be very harmful. And sometimes, of course, both of those things are going on at the same time. But figuring out how to get us back on track, I think, is hugely important. Other thoughts on that? Questions from the panelists? Lisa.
In addition to the classic, stand up for science and rallying around the importance of science in all aspects of society, I often encourage many to just, when they can, support, even if financially they can't donate or give in a way that supports a science operation, just being very vocal in their community about the role of science and scientists and continuing to just be present when we can for community-based science. So I found that I've just tried to participate whenever I can in just community gatherings where science may not even be the focus. I mean, it might be a farmer's market or a music gathering, but many graduate students at the university are very active in just tabling, at places where all corners of the community come together to try to prevent additional misinformation about science, particularly as it relates to our health. And so we're trying to be a little more unconventional that way and just try to be in places where we can answer questions and um, advocate for certain individuals that are running for office that very much are in support of science so that it doesn't become an afterthought about what you can champion in your community.
Yes, yes, and I'll note that Rob and I were interviewed for an article that will hopefully run in the New York Times in the next week or two yesterday, and I closed, she asked us a similar question. I said, hug a museum educator, hug a scientist. Is another thing you can do that doesn't cost you a cent. But giving, of course, is very, very helpful. And one last question for the panel discussion, then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. What gives you hope looking into the future? Anybody want to start off on that one?
I'll start off. I mean, I think as challenging as a position as a lot of students are in, I think that they are also a great source of hope. And I think that seeing the things that students really care about, regardless of sort of what other levels are showing them, really gives me a lot of hope for this generation to fight alongside alongside the rest of us too.
Yeah, absolutely. Young people are generally invigorating and encouraging in my work with them anyway. Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. The election results recently have been giving me hope, and I know a lot of people are frustrated with the chaos and the lack of funding for a whole wide variety of things right now. Different cancer research, I mean, a lot of stuff is really bipartisan, and so I feel hopeful that we just got to get through the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I'll also add that the first 6 months of 2025 were the first time in world history where we got more electricity from renewables than from coal. And that movement, I think, is unstoppable. Not so much for environmental reasons, but that's part of it. But it's now cheaper to get electricity from wind and solar than it is from coal and from natural gas too, especially if we take into account long-term costs. So I think there are some encouraging signs around climate and energy issues that are I think really rising up fairly quickly, and that gives me some hope. We've got a hugely long way to go, but things are getting better in many quarters. Any other? Yes, go ahead, Toby. Unmute.
I mean, just having been in California and talking with a lot of folks in the energy sector who are very involved in renewables and energy storage systems and hydropower, and it's very exciting. It is very exciting to see how much momentum and how much investment, both in terms of capital, but in terms of human resources and enthusiasm, there still is, in spite of everything. That's definitely something that has uplifted my spirits, and also remembering as a climate scientist, as I like to remind my students, that even if we did everything perfectly and even if we got the answer right tomorrow and started reducing our emissions, we wouldn't really know in our lifetimes if we'd succeeded.
Right.
Like, we wouldn't really know. And it's a multi-generational challenge to teach the next generation and the next generation how to teach the next generation to maintain a stable climate system. And because it's a multi-generational, multi-century, very long timescale problem, we can't really be fixated on whether or not we've succeeded. All we can do is say that it's better to be taking little steps in the right direction than running the wrong way. And that also gives me hope.
Yeah. Okay, let's open it up for discussion. I'm going to stop screen sharing, and folks can. It'll be easier for me to see you if you raise your hand using the react button to raise your hand like this, because that raises you to the top of the list. But if you need to go like this, then go like that. Let's open it, and you can also put things in the chat. And I will open it up to the audience for questions, comments, things they want to share. Rob, go ahead.
I see that Marion has a question, so why don't we start with Marion?
Okay, great. Marion, take it away. You've got to unmute yourself.
Um, I guess I'm a little bit more of an optimist than a pessimist, although sometimes it's hard to tell. But I look back, as you see, I have white hair. I look back over the years of what's gone on in Congress and so forth. And don't forget, this country was gobsmacked by McCarthy and McCarthyism. And we survived that and did a major correction and got him out of there, though there were those who thought it wouldn't be possible. And I think we need to take a longer view. After all, we're in the geosciences here. We're supposed to be taking a longer view.
Right.
And and I think we need to do that.
Yeah,
That's
I think that's a very important point that from the perspective of geologic time, we're just a blip here, but we're a blip that's making various kinds of differences. And Rob, did you have a question, or did you just want to highlight one?
I just wanted to raise my hand. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Marion. I think it is true that sometimes we forget, even politically, how many things we've been through in the past couple of centuries. And I have to imagine people thought at each of those points in time that we'd never get out of it, and that was the end. And so hopefully we can stay the course. So this is, I don't know if this question has a direct answer. I know Toby has some thoughts, but almost everybody said something about funding, and I'm sure even David, I don't think you mentioned funding specifically, but I'm sure whether the lead programs happen or not depend on some kind of funding. So my question is, what might be the prospects, if there are any, for growth of opportunities to support research or education or graduate students with non-federal funding, or I guess, David, in your case, it's maybe state or city funding, but do you foresee a way to pivot, at least for a while, to a different group of people, different group of stakeholders who might be interested enough in the collective work of our group to keep things going or regrow things? And it is for anybody. I know that's a very general question, but so I'll just throw it out there and let anybody answer it.
Toby, go for it.
I think the answer is yes to an extent if we look at some of the graduate student opportunities, at least in the climate and atmospheric science space, where there are many applications of those skills in the private sector and a lot of interest from industry in having people who can make better use and smarter uses of the climate weather data that either the companies are collecting or that might be publicly available. The problem, going back to STEM identity activation and Lisa's comments, that it's not very egalitarian to just leave it up to the students who can pay for a master's degree to be the ones who get to be part of science, right? That doesn't actually necessarily even strengthen the scientific workforce, because you're not providing the opportunities to the people who have a different perspective, a different background, different heritage, and therefore insights that they would bring to the table to do the science better and make the whole enterprise stronger. And so while I do think there's potential to keep some of the funding going through private public partnerships, there's still going to have to be some other mechanism to also address the equity and inclusion dimension.
Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I certainly can't agree more. And on the loss of, significant groups of young people, graduate students, et cetera, especially from communities that had not always had access to science, in the way that many of us had. And we truly are. I mean, like Katie said, just in sort of average graduate student population, we're losing, part of a generation, and that is unfortunate. And when I look at opportunities for private foundations, we've begun to explore that in a little bit more detail. And sometimes there have been private donors that have landed in our lap, which we're grateful for, but it's usually not enough to support, a whole lab of graduate students. I've been thinking about all the money that, frankly, Mackenzie Scott is throwing around these days. I mean, great for her, and a number of the public universities in California have benefited from her recent donations, as have some of the historically Black colleges and universities. But it's hard to, of course, anticipate, where those opportunities come. And it is a full-time job, right? Trying to explore other sources of funding and be strategic. So we just try in my team to sort of every month check in about where there might be additional opportunities and pass all the information around that we get from other colleagues in the museum network. So just again, trying to stay open to ideas.
Yeah, and it makes me uncomfortable to be dependent on the kindness of billionaires and the fickleness that can go with that. And you know, there have been issues for a long time with various issues related to NSF and so forth, but before now it wasn't so fickle. But Toby had a hand up. Go ahead, Toby.
Well, I'm also the director of graduate studies, and I wanted to point out that when students come to graduate programs, there's often a misconception that, if you don't have all the math and all the physics in the case of our programs, right? Like if you don't have that background, even if you get in, you're not going to succeed. And that's just not the case at all. It's not what we've seen at all from students who come from underrepresented backgrounds in atmospheric science, climate science. What it takes is the additional mentorship and time to meet them where they're at, and they often become some of the most creative and ambitious and successful students with that extra input to bridge the gap between where they start and where they need to be by their second or their third year. And that's only to say that, just to amplify Lisa's point, it takes resources, it takes time, it takes people who have the capacity and the knowledge and the willingness, but also, a salary at the end of the day to be able to do those things.
And I think I saw that PC Alt had a hand up a minute or so ago. Do you have a question, PC? Who I'm guessing is somehow related to somebody else here who shares the same last name.
Sounds like an email I recognize as well.
No, I don't have a question. Just a passing thought.
Okay. Other questions, comments, thoughts, smart remarks?
Dawn, I can't find my hands up button. It's Carla.
Go ahead, Carla.
I appear to be lost in space. It's a lighting issue here, but that's okay.
The feeling is mutual.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share something that's a little bit kind of different but related. I did something uncharacteristic. I work for those of you who don't know me, I work for a small nonprofit. I do educational research, curriculum development, the usual kind of stuff for teachers, but I've been in that sort of nonprofit, soft money funded world for the last 20 years. And it's been very jarring as my colleagues' grants have been canceled. I have a grant called Sources and Claims, and it's clearly a misinformation grant, but we never used misinformation in the abstract or the title, so the bots did not pick us up and we were not canceled. But I'm holding a bunch of guilt for having this NSF grant, but all my friends are like, no, it's okay. We're happy that you still have it. But I started to think, what is going to be the way that I can contribute and fight in this administration? So I attended one of these resistance lab things that Representative Jayapal put on. And it was really interesting because I was connected with just general folks across the United States. And we were put into these rooms and asked to talk about what we could do in the face of what was happening. And I brought up saving data. So I am the education chair for the Earth Science Information Partners, which is this organization that arose so that NASA, NOAA, USGS, they could all talk to each other 30 years ago. But we have an education committee that is dedicated to helping teachers and students, primarily in the K-12 space, but also undergraduate, et cetera, use data and interact with all this wonderful federal data. And as Don showed earlier in that one slide on the, I think it was the climate change NOAA page, I was in the middle of a workshop this summer when all of a sudden I went to the page I'm used to going to, and there's this message from, according to executive order, whatever it was, gold standard, we're not going to have this. And so it was kind of a shocker. But in this situation with folks from across the country who are not involved in earth science or data, I brought up how important it is. Data is to your everyday life. You use NOAA data for your weather. You use all these data, and people were they just didn't realize it. And afterwards, we were asked to, like, which ideas that people put forth would you want to take action on if you could in the future? I was absolutely surprised that everybody said, we like Carla's idea because we can understand how important data is, and maybe we can do a little something to help save that data by raising people's awareness of how important data it is and how we don't want these sites to go down. We can't stop them from shutting down websites. We absolutely cannot, but we can at least get the public aware of how important this data is and what a travesty it would be if we didn't have the Mauna Loa observatory data for a 4-year gap. It's like, it's horrific to me as a long-term data educator to be in this, situation. But at the same time, I'm an optimist and I can't just sit there and stew. So I'm trying to think of actionable items. And I wanted to do billboard yard. I was inspired by a woman I saw in Massachusetts who put up all these billboards, but to put up data plots, like, here's what's happening in this, that, and the other. And my husband's like, no, do you want us to be targeted? No, you're not going to be billboard late. But I wasn't going to do anything really awful, just did you realize this is an exponential problem, etc. So anyway, I've rambled on more than what I should take up as comment time, but I just thought I could share that.
Yes, and I just put a link in the chat to the slide deck, which includes links to the places where some of those federal resources and data have gone, that were, the ones I mentioned. Toby, go ahead.
I have just maybe 3 quick comments. I have a hard stop at 5:30, and I added a slide. I did add a slide as per Rob's request that shows the air quality across the I-5 corridor from San Diego to Portland. I also put our article. I'm not trying to plug our article, but we tried to distill. There's a bunch of us from EAS in the atmospheric climate science community that came together to write a response to what was happening with the National Weather Service to make exactly this point that you're making, Carla, about the economic value of data. And so it's like for every $1 invested in NOAA, the U.S. has seen $73 of return on investment. And about a third of the U.S. economy uses National Weather Service or NOAA data in some capacity, whether it's forecasts that underpin travel or insurance or, crop insurance. I mean, it's just there's so many ways in which it shows up in the U.S. economy. And so there's an enormous value to it from a practical perspective.
Thank you. And Gustavo's had his hand up for a while. Sorry, Gustavo, go ahead.
I want to ask, or I make this question by David. Do you talk about the pollution, but I don't understand it is by pollution because I see a similar situation in Mexico City about the increase of pollution, but in this case is by the pollution on the air. And I remember that people in Mexico City feel a lot of illness by this condition or by this situation, but I don't understand if it is similar, in special by our homes is very different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to look into that more. The number, basically the two ways that um, people get lead poisoning is through inhalation or ingestion. The number one cause of lead poisoning in the United States is through paint dust, lead paint dust. The older the paint, the more the lead content is in it. And so in Cleveland and Buffalo, a lot of the homes were built 1920s, 1910s, and earlier. And so it have a ton of lead. Leaded gasoline was the big problem before, and so that was in the air everywhere. But when that became illegal, it dropped quite a bit. And then people who work in the lead industry and are surrounded by factories working with lead, whether it's batteries or whatnot, will have higher rates of lead poisoning. And there was an article in the New York Times that was really tragic about a week ago about lead battery workshops in Nigeria, where the reporters hired folks to do phlebotomy and do testing of blood testing around the factory and the factory workers, and found really high elevated levels. So as soon as I get off this, I'll Google about what's going on in Mexico City. I'm very curious about it. But in Cleveland, 99.9% of our lead poisoning is from lead paint dust. And it just never got the same kind of attention that Flint did, because the water basically could happen to anybody, and lead paint dust can only happen to those people, was kind of is the theory why it's not been as interesting for the rest of the country.
Okay, and Toby has added a slide and wants to say a few words about it. So
Most forward with this initiative, whether we have funding or not, because it's important. And these are relatively, low cost sensors. It's actually the device that does the PM 2.5, PM 1, and PM 10 measurements is the same that's inside the purple air, the actual piece of equipment that's inside the device, but it does a few other things as well. And I colorized it using the AQI scale, but I removed it so that it's not mistaken for being actual AQI. This is just PM 2.5 concentrations colorized the same way. And so green would be lower, like very low PM 2.5 concentrations. We also have altitude, temperature, humidity, CO2, all the other PM distributions for the same transect now. And if you're wondering why is Southern California so green, it's because I took the I-15 from San Diego around the backside of the mountains, and right where you hit the edge of Los Angeles, this is like West Covina, for those of you who are fans of My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, you'll know where that is. And the red just, this is 1 minute sampling. It shows up within a less than a 10-minute interval when you zoom in on this. Just you come around the corner and you can see LA, and then boom, the AQI or the PM 2.5 shoots up. And then throughout the Central Valley, if you look at the humidity, I'll put a LinkedIn post about all this at some point, but you see if you've looked recently at a satellite map, as some of us weather nerds are wont to do, the entire Central Valley of California has been in fog for most days since Thanksgiving. It's just had this socked in, like a bathtub full of fog. And you see that really clearly in the humidity as well. And I do think having devices like this out there battery operated, Wi-Fi connected. I could imagine kids biking around with them, you know, and doing transects just in their own neighborhoods and mapping out like, oh wow, it's really a lot worse next to the highway. And one of the really, I mean, I don't know what the right word is, but one of the salient experiences we had with this technology was in 2023 when we had set up in a teacher's classroom two of these sensors, one inside of a tank that was sealed off and placed next to a window. And the students had picked vegetation and moss and grass to see if they could get CO2 levels to go down inside of the tank. And then right next to it, there was a control, and it was in 2023. And so the smoke from the Canadian wildfires came in, and within a day, the students were able to be the ones that said, like, look, like the air quality in the classroom is terrible, and we even have a control. We know that it's worse than it would otherwise be. And it turns out it's probably because the way that they installed the COVID filters meant that they're pulling in a lot of outdoor air, which for managing COVID was a good solution, but for smoke events like that, it wasn't. And so I have to, again, first of all, the museum shall not fail. Second of all, having these data products at a much lower cost now than it would have been to acquire them a decade or even 5 years ago is it's an opportunity that's different now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And so there's some sort of bright lining there. And I have a hard stop at 5:30, but I would be happy to take other questions via email about this.
Good, very good. And I will shamelessly put in the link for donating if folks want to do that.
And so I should just let everybody know that I pushed Toby into sharing that slide because this is Rob. Because I just thought it was such a great example of many of the things that have come up this evening about how do we continue our important work, how do we involve students in science, how do we do things in creative, new, efficient ways. And so I think it's really inspiring. It also, there's an equity aspect of this, so it's important work that needs to be shared with the public. And obviously, like not everything, we can't easily do this with like deep sea drilling or something, but I think there are many ways that we'll need to foster this kind of creativity and involve our students in it in the future. So thank you, Toby, for sharing it. This is like new data as of like a few hours
This
old.
morning. It's from this morning.
Yeah.
And I didn't, and the whole thing, the whole time I did this, it was so rushed, and I couldn't test it to my own satisfaction before I had to get on the road on Tuesday night and drive to Bakersfield. And then I couldn't test it because I was busy with meetings with folks that are out west that I was learning from about all these exciting innovations. And I was like, I'll get to it. I couldn't check. I couldn't log in. I couldn't see if it was actually recording the GPS and actually recording this. And then I had to get going again. I knew that there was going to be fog in the basin. It was going to take longer to drive than I had anticipated. So I didn't have time to stop in Reading as I had anticipated. I just didn't even know if it had worked for the whole, whatever it had been, 36 hours before, until 9:30 this morning when I logged into, and I'm here in Oregon, and I'm staying with my parents this evening, and I logged into their Wi-Fi, and it was like, yeah, science, that's what it's all about. And I also had the idea, even before that, though, if it had failed, and this is where, STEM identity matters, right? If it had failed, I would still have had the story to tell about it failing, and this is why I tested it in a low-stakes situation. I wasn't trying to figure out something that was going to be a, make it or break it scientific inquiry. We get one shot to go to Antarctica, and this has to work. It was more like, hey, does this work? If it doesn't, why not? Under what circumstances? We got to test the technology ahead of time. That's part of the business, and it's part of how you think as a scientist. And students are really good at this. They can embrace that mindset from an early age.
Absolutely. And I think that's a fairly nice note to close on, and a hopeful one. And I do know that I think both Toby and Lisa have commitments in a minute. If others want to stay on and chat a little bit, I can stick around for a little while yet myself. But
All right.
Thank
Well,
you
thank you so
all.
much, and thank you for all that you're doing, and good luck, and everybody who can, who has an aunt or an uncle who's a boomer and has an extra house somewhere that they want to sell, get a tax credit. Just
Yeah.
saying, And yeah, the future's not a place; it's a thing we're building together. So
I thought it
long.
was a
Thanks so
great
much.
discussion. Thanks so much. And like I
Thanks.
said, I can stick around for a little bit if folks have other questions that I can answer anyway. But thanks
Thank
to our
you.
panelists.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.
And Jeff's companion there has things to say, I see.
Hi. Hi.
Hi. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
I can't see my
Well,
face.
say hi, and then you got to go to bed
I can't see.
because you're not in the camera.
There you go.
I gotta go here.
Future scientists.
I go
Excellent.
here.
Our future has to go to bed.
Yep.
I do that.
Thank you guys for everything.
Thank you.
I can't see.
Oh, they're already in bed. They're going to bed too because they have to go get up in the morning. Go to sleep.
How y'all doing?
Is anyone here going to AGU?
I am going virtually, which means I've uploaded my video already, but I will zoom into sessions
The entire
where I can.
situation. Everybody said, love you to Jeff.
I'm going to mute Jeff because I don't think he means to be on. Yeah.
Dawn, you said you weren't allowed to attend your session?
That's the way the site reads. It's very weird.
Did you check with Missy? Isn't Missy like
I
the
haven't. I will.
Okay.
It's been a very, very busy week, so I haven't.
You might check with her because that seems really odd.
Yes, it does seem really odd.
And I
Although-
will try to go to it. I'm basically going to be tabling for ESIP and CERC in the exhibit hall.
Yeah, we were talking before amongst the panelists before we opened up the crowd, and Lisa thought she might know who triggered that new policy. So who knows? Bryce, you got a question?
Okay. Well, I've been out of all this business for 26 years, so I'm not really, I can't comment about trends and this sort of thing. But as this whole program is going on, I couldn't help but wonder what our political situation, what effects it would have. Well, there are many of them, but one of them in terms of foreign graduate students and foreign faculty members and so forth. If I were abroad, I wouldn't want to come to the United States under these circumstances. And I can't imagine what kind. I mean, I just don't know whether this has had any significant effect, that we can see yet. But that's all I could think about.